Well, my name is Dave Greenberg. Welcome to the Powered Franchisee Podcast. I'm here with Doug Gray and Emily Bouchard, and they bring us a wealth of knowledge about building a legacy business. And you're wondering what a legacy business is. Well, first, let's start with Doug and Emily. Please introduce yourselves.
I'm Doug. I'm a business psychologist. I've been doing this work since 1997. And today we're both sitting in Denver, Colorado at a conference where we're talking a lot about leadership and legacy and succession. So it's fairly easy to riff together. And who are you?
I'm Emily Bouchard. I have been working with families with successful family businesses and enterprises since 2003. I've recently joined forces with Doug to really expand the knowledge base and the understanding of leadership within family businesses, because we see how important it is and how much it supports successful succession.
And every franchisee I've ever worked with struggles with that question.
We've talked about this before, and our experience in the automotive space, where we've really seen first, second, third, now fourth, maybe fifth generation family members take over the enterprise if they haven't exited the business. And it's interesting to see the variability of preparation for those individuals to take over the leadership position. And it's also interesting to see the differing dynamics that take place, some good, some not so good. Now, Emily, okay, family advisor, speaker, author, help raising the next generation leaders. I work with individuals who want to start their own business, be their own boss, and many of them love the idea of creating a legacy, leaving a legacy. With that said, when you think of raising generational leaders within a family business to create that legacy play?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. We start young and have them really understand all the different facets of the business, and don't just choose one child to do that, but it's whoever your offspring are, they all need to have those opportunities to really get in and understand and know, why is mom and dad going to the business on Saturday? Why are they talking about this at the table? It's people live and breathe these franchises, especially when they're first getting them started. And the more that the children, even at young ages, understand and value and understand what, the more they're going to be engaged later on. But also it helps to give everyone an even playing field around it. Like they all get to understand it and know it and grow up in it. And then they get a sense for, I'm interested in this, I'm not. And then the other one is really having conversations and knowing how to talk about it as a family around what does this family business mean to us? What are the pros of having it? What are the harder things about having it? And then what are the things that we need to do as a family to make it so we want to keep it, especially if some of us are going to be in it and some aren't. Because you made me think when you said fourth generation, fifth generation, we're talking exponential growth in families at that point. And instead of having mom and dad and a son and daughter, you've got multiple cousins and you've got different family lines. And it's like, how does this all look and work? And how do you expand with that? So that's one of the things that we really care about, is how to support people in growing with their family and their business as it grows.
A little structure goes a long way. So to your point, when you've got a recognized need that the owners want legacy and they prefer to have family members take over the ownership, that becomes a governance question. How do you structure that as an educational experience or series of? We talk in other businesses about career ladders as if it's linear, right? And there's only one way to, but that's not the world of family businesses. Think about every Saturday night dinner or Sunday night dinner conversation. People don't quit talking about the business. So another image is like a lattice. Rose garden would have a lattice. Well, if you develop yourself in the career and then move over here and develop yourself in the next role, internal or external to the franchise, that is what accelerates the legacy. Now, next gens want those career opportunities. They want the lattice. They don't want the ladder. And they want to know that they've got choices. I've never met a 20-year-old without an opinion.
Right.
They want to express it. They want you and I, all of us, to hear it, validate it, and move forward, right?
Right.
That's a beautiful thing.
I eventually want to get into the tool set that you have, Doug, that helps people work through this, and Emily. But help me with something, because, I help people who are really exiting their corporate career. They've built a skill set, they've built a business, they've made money for other people. They're transitioning to become entrepreneurs and make money for themselves. One of the things I share with them is you cast a shadow as an entrepreneur within your family. So your kids are extremely observant. I don't know whether they're 2, 4, 14, or 24. What you do is you're going to create some character. You're going to create some observations for your children as they see their family become entrepreneurs and create a business. That something could become theirs. So if you were speaking to one of my candidates and, talking about the shadow that they cast, what thoughts would you have for them to really set them up for that next generational leader within their family that could take over the business?
I often ask people, what's the feedback you're getting from others? What's the story that your children are saying? What does it mean to be a Greenberg or a Gray? Their answers will surprise us. We don't often ask our children, what does it mean to describe the character of a Gray family member? I'm picking on my family because I don't want to pick on your family.
Yeah.
But that's the story, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in psychology, it's our reflected best self. How do we ask others to give us the feedback about who I am at my best? Okay, that's one part of the picture. The other part of the gaps, and if we can identify what those gaps in my character might be, kids often will say it in the way that's best for them. It might not be the most professional because they've never been taught how to be delicate with Grandpa or Uncle Bob, who's got a drinking problem. And Uncle Bob, 20 years ago at the family cabin, made he or she feel uncomfortable when they were infants. Those are stories that are embedded in the oldest part of our brains. And we don't often get those stories out. So back to the question of development. I think they need facilitators.
And I think that the other thing I would offer, Dave, is oftentimes a desire to hear what the kids might think, but there can also be a lot of discomfort with it. So oftentimes a child in a family, whatever age they are, will ask a question or make an observation, and parents, because they might be uncomfortable, because they don't know how to answer it, might shut it down or might deflect it, or, you're too young. There might be reasons, and it's totally appropriate in that moment because you don't know how to answer it. One of the things, skills building, that we love to do is how to be able to be curious and open as your kids are curious. You want to cultivate that curiosity about you, about the business, and where feedback or an observation might initially hit you as, oh, I don't like that, or being offended by it. Like, there's a lot of emotion that can happen, especially in family. But if you can take a breath and say, oh, there's wisdom being offered here. There's an observation being offered here. There's something for me to look at in terms of what is that shadow I'm casting? I love how you said that, Dave. And if somebody's willing to be aware of that, and I think structure is really helpful too, because it's hard when you feel like it's off, you're hit with it out of the blue.
Sometimes just enough structure, not too much.
No, but if you're having a regular family meeting with a facilitator, it gives you a space and a container to be able to have those conversations and have them go well. Or having one meal a week where it's not like talking about the details or the business, but it's more talking about, what does this all mean for us? What's the purpose of this? Why do we even have this business? Those kind of deeper questions, and allowing for that to happen can be helpful too.
And it can be part of a team advisory approach. That's critical. If I were to ask my attorney or my lawyer for advice, I'm going to get their bias and their expertise. Perfect thing. But then if I were to ask all four of them in that same weekend retreat, it happens annually or quarterly, there's not only an assessment, there's an opportunity for each person to say, how am I taking this legal advice to heart in a way it's going to mitigate risks?
What I'm taking away from that, Doug and Emily, is there's more to the conversation than just observation. You're saying make it a structured moment, make it a structured point in time, whether it's Thanksgiving for the family or, it's a quarterly event where you actually bring everyone together and say, this is why we work at the factory this every day. This is why Bob is running sales and he's running the factory. This is how it all comes together. And are you saying bring them all into that circle at a point in time and start
repeatedly? Yeah, not just one. It's not a one-hit wonder. It's a process that over time enables people to articulate what's important and what's possible.
And the other thing that's helpful about it too is, and this, like, there's so many things as a new entrepreneur that you're learning, and it can be quite stressful. And you're looking at P&Ls, you're looking, how are we doing on the spreadsheets, the budgets, and And as you're trying to understand and get your head around it, your kids are noticing it. They're noticing the stress. They're noticing the difficulty. It's just part of the learning process. So if there's a way that you can have a structured time to say, we learned a lot this week, and we want to share with you a little bit about what we're learning and how it's really supporting us in the business. And do you have any questions about it? And it just creates that understanding and milieu within the family that it's okay to have questions. And it's great to have ongoing conversations about what does it mean to be an owner of a business, and what those responsibilities are. And then also making sure, if you're going to do it at a holiday, that there's a specific time and place for it. This is the container to talk about business. And then when this is done, we have an agreement. We're not going to talk about business for the rest of our weekend together.
Gotcha.
Because that's the other thing is, it can totally take over. So having that it makes a big difference, and it makes it so the family's more open to having it be a legacy business because they don't resent how much time it takes away from them.
My personal experience, my family had a family business, and we were in the garment industry in New York. My father behind his big desk my grandfather behind his big desk at that time was bigger than life to me. We all knew him as
Sure.
And but I
call it the Roosevelt desk. It sounds like belongs in the Oval Office.
Yeah, it was the Modecraft desk. Corporation. We I don't, maybe many people don't know it. It's under a different name today, but we were an apparel business and outerwear. But my impressionable moments, I used to go with my dad on Saturdays, and he would sit with Grandpa and go through the sales orders, and I would go back and work with Frankie in the shipping department, and I'd put boxes together so we could ship coats.
Right.
My grandfather would always call me in and he'd say, do you want to be the hunter or do you want to be the hunted? Do you want to be the hunter or do you want to be the hunted? So, obviously he wanted me to be the hunter. The things he told me, he says, son, just don't argue with an idiot because you're going to look like an idiot.
I like that.
It's a thing that, you take away from these family conversations that form our character as kids and potential entrepreneurs or leaders of a generation. Talk to me about how you help people. You've talked about structure. I know the next gen peer group is something that you work to facilitate, and it's very close to what we used to do with our dealers and the dealer 20 groups. So share with me what the next gen peer group is and what kind of structure that can create, not within the family, but the peer-to-peer structure to help people learn and grow as they try to do this.
Yeah.
Well, I'll start by asking, how did you learn? If you think about that's not directed at you, Dave, but anybody who's listening or viewing this session, all of us as adults learned when we got accurate feedback reflected back to us from people we like and trust. Now, it might not have been easy to hear it, but they were peers who gave us candor that was accurate. And that feedback changed our performance the next time around, whether it was a behavioral outcome or a performance outcome. When I'm thinking about franchisees, and I'm thinking about any cohort that's, say, 1 to 5 years into that new experience, they really can't talk to the owners. And they don't always want to talk to the other guy across town or gal because there's a competitive disadvantage there, right? So what they need to find often is a cohort of people who are at the same or similar stage in life, but not direct competitors. And they could be franchisees in a different sector, for instance, but they're struggling with the same problems, which we all struggle with: sales, operations, resource management. How do we deal with changing laws and tax issues? Well, those are peer group topics that can only be discussed candidly with other folks. So let's imagine that there's somebody watching this who's interested in a peer group that meets for 12 months, and it has virtual sessions and it has direct sessions. That's called a hybrid model. Well, the power of that is you can look at some content. In other words, what works. We know what works. And there's a hot seat every month. And let's imagine the group meets for 2 hours and there's 10 people in the group. And at some point you're going to be in the hot seat, not because it's uncomfortable, but because you want to share a business concern that's critically important. And others are going to ask you clarifying questions. And they're not going to say, oh, I read this clever idea in this book. They're going to say, here's what worked in our business. Now you're getting direct feedback just in time that accelerates your individual problem, your development. That's invaluable. It's priceless.
Give me your moment of fame in terms of how someone talks to you to get more about Next Generation Peer Group. What do they do? Do they call you? Do they go to your website?
There's lots of ways to reach me, but nextgenpeergroups.com is probably one of the best. And there are some options. There are different steps, different opportunities that people have.
So nextgenpeergroups.com. That's how you find Doug and start talking about what he just described. Because, accountability groups are great. accountability groups tend to not bring, from my experience, all the wealth of knowledge and best practices and so the accountability of, like people, they're trying to accomplish something from a generational wealth, generational leadership, generational business transaction or business transition. And I said transactions because I'm going to come to you, Emily, and ask you about transactions because you have a lot of experience in exit planning, right? And I want to talk about that in a minute. So that's where they would come to talk to you and say, okay, Doug, that's how I kind of start the conversation to maybe participate in a group and see if it's for me.
Yeah, and we've missed the second level of this. So there's the access to us as facilitators and the access to each other. We expect them to interact with each other in between the calls. So there's the direct sessions and then the indirect, synchronous and asynchronous. So in between those calls, we want people to reach out to each other. So we schedule it. We want them to reach out with us. So we schedule it. If they can't and don't, that's their choice. But the idea is we got to provide the structures that support people so that they're useful when they need them.
This is another way to think about Doug and his next gen peer group, because they really help you think through what you either don't want to think through or can't think through. I just am a huge supporter of these accountability groups, dealer groups, franchisee groups, whatever they are, because you start to learn and challenge each other in new ways. And without surrounding yourself with smarter people, you don't get smarter. So Doug, thank you for that.
I call it unpaid consulting or escalating consulting. Let's imagine you've got 10 or 12 consultants now instead of 1 or 2.
Emily.
Dave, I'll just say one thing because of the story you shared. Could you imagine if you went and built boxes as a child with this person who's working really hard in the shipping department, and then you go away, you go to school, you have your life, and then you come in to take over for your dad. And what is the impression of you by the person who worked with you as a child? Now, are they going to keep thinking of you as the child? And have you earned the right to be in that leadership role? Have you developed the leadership and skills that you need to be effective? Or are you going to have to prove yourself that much more than somebody else who was hired in that role? So one of the other things that the peer group provides is a chance to connect with other people that are in similar situations of, because they are a family member stepping into a leadership role in that succession plan in the business, they're held to a standard that's assessed, watched. They're always being held to a certain bar in terms of how they should be.
Right,
yeah. And they need a place where they can connect with other people that understand that, can empathize, and also give them some of their, this worked for me when I got hit by that, or the presumptions around, you just got this because you're the son, as opposed to you earned it, earned the right. So
I want to add on to that. So we haven't yet talked about the non-family members. In your garment shop, let's say there were 4 to 6 family members. There were 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 other non-family members, right? Well, how do they accelerate their careers? How do they know their role? Those are the people who are really the moneymakers in every franchise. They need a voice. They need a cohort. They need a peer group that supports non-family leaders in a family-owned business.
Okay, I'm gonna, give you a 2 or 3% raise for every year, and maybe get you into the stock option pool, or maybe give you profit sharing. Those are the typical corporate approaches. Give you nice benefits. What do you see in family businesses that surround non-family members and make them feel like family?
Choice. Okay. So they've got choice, and then they've got agency to pick whatever direction they want to go in.
And having clear standards for their leadership development and their path and their careers and what's possible for them. Like, is it presumed that you only get to a certain place because family members are going to be at certain roles, or are there places where they could actually excel and get support around their own development to step into other roles too?
Okay, so we've done all this good stuff with you guys, and we've gone through the next generation peer groups, and business is going really well, and you got 2 or 3 generations. All of a sudden an exit comes up. What do you do, Emily? How do you think about that? Because, especially in the auto industry, right? All sorts of things are getting bought up. But even the people that I talk to want an exit plan. So if it's a legacy play, how do you deal with an exit plan and manage the legacy piece of it?
Oh, such an important question. And the first thing I'm going to say right out the gate is, if you get approached and somebody gives an offer to buy out the franchise, slow everything down, right? I think what happens is sometimes big numbers get in front of you and you get kind of blindsided by them, and you can end up signing a letter of intent before you actually actually have all of your ducks in a row. And that's a big mistake. So that's be the first thing I would say out the gate.
Control the timeline.
Yeah. And then the other is, with a franchise, you have to be really, really clear about what the franchisor requires, right? So that you make sure that you don't get too far down the road and you're not too far away from what they wanted. But if you're looking at exiting the business, there's a way that you're actually able to do it in a way where there's a significant windfall for you and the family. It's just like when you left a corporate job to become an entrepreneur and you had to learn a whole set of skills for that. The same thing applies when you have your exit and you get a windfall of liquidity event that might happen with that. You're then now in a position of money managing. You're going to have a lot of advisors coming to you. You're going to have a lot of different people with their thoughts about what you should do. And that's where you want to slow everything down. You want to get with the family first and foremost and say, We've got some major decisions to make. And the other thing is managing the communication around it, especially because of like social media and rumors. And you want to make sure that things are handled in the right way so that you get to maximize the opportunity and you're minimizing the likelihood of jeopardizing it because of what somebody might say or do with it.
Every business owner we've ever met, all three of us, has an inflated view of the value of their business. Every one of them. So how do you assess accurately that valuation in a way that's going to be useful? Endless. I'll never forget probably a client a son, was raving about how he contributed at age 16 to the technological infrastructure that led to the website and to the business that was in fact named partially after him, and that his packaging of those products made it so successful. He was ranting on the phone, and I walked from my office through the house.
16?
No, at this point he was 26, but he acted like he was 16.
But
and it's so because his estimate of valuation was based on a whole different industry, software, than a retail franchise business. So often people have different notions of valuations are never discussed when they could be every 3 to 5 years.
So one of our jobs is to really help people vent and get out what it is that they care the most about and what they see. And especially when there's resentments. I mean, when you have family, there can be that happen. And then we help to redirect in a way that allows them to see that they brought value and other value happened as well. We are able to look at how does a family want to think about the purpose, the value, and like their values related to the value.
Mm-hmm.
And when somebody goes on like that, it's because they really want to know that they matter.
Right.
Are there particular tools that you deploy to help people kind of assess the leadership capabilities of their family members in a way?
Well, that's the layup question. Absolutely, Dave. So let me give you another URL.
Great assessment.
What is it?
assessnextgen.com. In response to your question, there are 360 assessments that exist that are off the shelf, and they're not customized for family business leaders and non-family business leaders. They ought to be. I know, you may know that 360 assessments are the most valid form of feedback. If I were to ask 10, 20 what it needs to do to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing, those 10 or 20 people will give me great feedback. Or they'll give it to Emily, who will collate the data and then give it to me later. That's hugely valuable. And 360 assessments are not used enough when looking at succession. So let's imagine you've got 5 candidates to take over in a succession scenario. Some auto enterprise that is massive and has multiple locations. I'm thinking of the Waltrip family, the Hendricks family, the Penske family. I lived in Charlotte. All our kids went to school with the NASCAR people. So when I think about those franchises that have evolved over time, all of them struggle with this same question. How do I assess the capacity of all these potential family and non-family successors? 360 assessments is the name of the process. The URL is assessnextgen.com, just as it sounds.
And if someone's interested, you help them work through that process. It's a tool that you own and you deploy.
I do. Patented, licensed, all that, and their licensees.
Well, and I have to add this because one of the reasons I've joined forces with Doug is because it's validated. I mean, it's a real, and basically what that means in anybody's terms is it actually does what it says it does. Been used with enough people that you actually know that the information that you're getting from it is going to be really valuable and accurate for you. There are a lot of different assessments, but the fact that this is focused on family businesses and it's been validated with the kind of numbers that allow us to see that, people like you, family businesses like yours, this assessment is extremely useful and valuable for them as it will be for you. I think that that's the part that's thrilling to me, because I don't know how many people, they hear the word 360 assessment and they run for the hills because it's like, oh no, those don't work. That just causes more. It's like, no, this report is comprehensive and it looks at where your strengths are and then where you have these learning edges, but it's not like let's tear you down or let's,
So let's reframe this. 20 years ago, when you two each had corporate experience, the employer owned a 360 process, and they may have said, Doug is in a high potential. He needs to undergo this 360 process. Why? Because we really don't know his gaps. So we got to identify the gaps.
Right.
That's the wrong model for today's leaders.
Yeah.
And what we now know is that the process needs to be confidential. It needs to be owned by the leader, not the employer. So if that Fortune 500 client, whom I've worked with a lot, thinks that they could keep that data and pull it out of a HR person's file 20 years later, and then that candidate cannot any longer be considered as a VP, those are the horror stories that we've heard. So there's 360s and then there's self-reports. Self-reports are good, but they're quite limited. There's nothing better for a potential franchisee than a 360 assessment like mine.
Excellent. So if you get into that situation, are there some thoughts on, you talked about, valuations are different and all the rest, and you got to slow down the process and do those things. But exit planning is a big deal, right? You're about to cash out, and my grandfather sold, and, we enjoyed a nice life, but, I didn't, get any, I still have to work for a living, right? So, some people might not see it that way. They might want to cash out with dad or grandpa or however it's going to be. How do you handle those things? Because they get so tricky.
It is really tricky. I think, again, having really good clarity as a family about what the purpose of the business is. Is it meant to be perpetuated, for it to stay in the family? Do we want family members to have skin in the game? So part of the exit plan is that they're going to buy us out. And then how do we support them in building up their resources and resources so that they could if they wanted to? Or are we going to make it available with some sort of buyout plan over years? Like, if we're going to keep it in the family, there's all kinds of different structures that can happen. And that's where, like, having your team of your accounting and your legal and your financial advisor around all of that is essential, and having them all working in concert. But if you're going to sell, there's some people in the family that really have a strong identity attached to the name on the side of the building. It's our business. It's our, I've worked with a lot of franchisors that, have helped franchisees be very successful. And there's such a sense of deep identity and ownership within that because of the name. And then franchisees can also have the sense of, I'm thinking about car dealer families that I've worked with where their name is on their franchises, even as they're selling Cadillac or Honda or, and so that identity piece is extremely important to address as a family before you sell, because who are you in the community? Where's your influence you want to have? What does it mean to no longer own this that has been such a huge part of the whole community? Sure. So that's the part that I really support the families in exploring as they're looking at the tactical side of it with the financial aspects of it as well.
Here's a key question to ask those people. What is it you fear losing? If they fear losing the social capital and the identity as a family member in that small town, let's say, then there's something work to be done. If they fear losing a dividend or a certain cash number, well, there's an opportunity to distribute wealth over time so that they could be paid in that manner to exceed that number. The point is that our fears define our behaviors. So if you fear a loss in this direction, that's our job. We identify the fears that people have and then mitigate against them.
Identifying what each family member is going to be missing once they exit the business, whether it's a paycheck or a dividend, or I like being part of the community, I don't feel that connection anymore. So what you're saying is really think hard about the value they're receiving from the business and how they're giving from the business, and figure out how they maintain that post-exit.
And the other thing about post-exit to be anticipating before it happens is if it's going to be public knowledge, and the way the internet is now, you kind of have to assume it's always going to be public knowledge on some level. Your life may never look the same again, because there's one thing to be a business owner in the community when, an exit's public and people know how much money it was for. There's a lot of presumptions that can happen. So knowing how to navigate that, the requests for money, the assumptions about whether somebody has access to money or not, and also really setting up great educational training for the family in terms of however you're going to set up the distribution of those funds. Is it going to go into trusts? Is it going to go into a few people are going to get greater amounts because they worked in the business versus others that didn't? I worked with one franchise family where it was a heavy machinery franchise, very successful. Brother and the son-in-law worked in the business, and the sisters all owned real estate that the business rented to, so it was all intertwined, right? And so when they were talking about their exit, they needed to look at it from all these different aspects, and were the sisters going to continue to own the real estate, and then whoever was buying this was going to rent from them?
Right.
But and then did the brother and the brother-in-law get bonuses from the exit because they were working in the business? So having that transparent and including the family members that are all being impacted is so important, because otherwise everybody presumes the worst. I don't care who you are as a human being.
And it will evolve. So if there's 2 or 3 or 5 bloodlines, and this bloodline is more interested in car dealerships, but this one's more interested in, I don't know, real estate, and this one's more interested in fintech startups. You never know. And each of those groups has their own interests that implies sometimes conflict.
Right.
Well, if they knew that before the liquidity event, then they could begin to explore it, right? And if they're tied to somehow grandparents' story, whatever the story might have been, that often makes it easier for them to think about what's next. Going by bloodline is really helpful.
Let's talk about the book.
I think we all know that there's lots of books out there sometimes, and we don't always know what to go to that's a kind of a playbook, a short resource. It's a book of books. So when I did the 360 assessment, we had 50 different validated items, which is a behavior. And we whittled it down to 10 for each of these 5 systems. And the book describes each of those 5 systems. And it gives folks a short script. We need playbooks. We need books of books. So each chapter has, I don't know, 6 or 8 other resources that people could turn to should they need it. It's called the Success Playbook for Next Gen Family Business Leaders, which is a long title.
So Doug and Emily, a successful franchisee is buying into a proven business concept. They have to have the capital and capacity as a leader and a manager to run a business, and the capital to make sure they can capitalize the business. They also need to execute a playbook. So any franchisee that's playing at the top of the quartile executes that playbook really well, because there are operating systems behind it. When you think about executing the playbook, okay, I know you talked about a playbook being part of what you discuss with potential clients. Share with me the book that you have that kind of plays into that thought.
So the science led to the book, and a client said, "Oh, it'd be really nice if you could write this stuff up into a book. Something simple, something that we could use that's short, less than 100 pages." So the Success Playbook for Next Gen Family Business Leaders is just that. And it's the top 10 behaviors. These are actionable things that people ought to do. For instance, at an individual level, you want people to do this, express my thoughts and feelings on important topics. You want people to do that, but they don't always. They'll bite their tongue for 100 reasons. And the second one in that individual system is focus on, develop a positive attitude. Why? Because optimism is a choice. Learned optimism is a thing. Optimistic people outperform others in leadership, and they live longer and have better relationships and all those things. So if people were to take 2 behaviors like that and adopt them, that's a playbook. You take the end, you take the football around the corner, and you score a touchdown, right? Move the family system farther down the field.
And I'll just say one thing, because the book's super easy to read. And I like that a lot, because it's so funny, because Doug's a phenomenal researcher. There's a lot of great supplemental material in there if you want to dive into it, but he made it really easy to read it. And I would recommend everybody get the book anyway, because what you say about giving and receiving feedback is so simple, and you show how to apply it. And if you can just develop that one skill as a next gen leader or as a leader in a business, you're going to do so much better. And so few people know how to do that. So I like how you give like really good examples of how to do it and what's needed for those different
Thanks.
So how does someone get the book?
Anywhere, online. Just go by the title. Amazon certainly has it. Every other digital platform, Audible. I think there's 200 platforms. All you need is the title, The Success Playbook for Next Gen Family Business Leaders.
To all my audience out there, if they want to find this book, what do they search?
The Success Playbook for Next Gen Family Business Leaders by Doug Gray.
Well, I think this is a start of a relationship, and we'll figure out how we continue to co-market, because I think your topic is really spot on for people that are thinking about creating a legacy play with their investment in their own business, specifically in franchising.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Nothing's more important. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.